And thank you for coming to my talk. It's been a couple of long years since we've been able to do conferences in person, so Odoo is very happy to be back here with everybody once again. So today's talk is about payroll in Odoo. We're going to be talking about essentially how to accumulate all the data to save you time and money while you're running payroll, but also to create a more integrated employee experience with the payroll data. I've been asked to speak relatively loud, so if it seems like I'm yelling, that would be why. So what kind of data am I talking about, right? So let's talk about timesheets and attendance, right? The real data when somebody goes and works. We got to get that onto a payslip, right? Vacations, paid time off, that kind of information. Withholdings that are specific to an employee, like insurance or 401k. Other deductions potentially for employees, like garnishments, for example. And profit-sharing mechanisms like bonuses or commissions. We have a talk on commissions tomorrow as well. So with all that data together, right, how do we accumulate it and how do we start managing that inside of Odoo? So Odoo has you covered on that. Let's go ahead and pop into Odoo, and we're going to start configuring an employee for the first time. So over in Odoo, I have my employee area down here. And I did sleep my laptop before coming up here. All right, so we could look at some of our existing employees, but we will look at them later. So let's start a new one called OXP. So for the most part, that's really all that you, EXP, that you really need to be able to save at the very least, but there's more information on here that you really are gonna probably want. So if you've worked in expenses before, you're probably familiar with the concept of a private address. We will generally want to create that. I'm gonna just say EXP star now to mirror that. The most important aspect of that, just like expenses, is that if you have some kind of payable account that's specific to the employees, most people do, you'll want to go to the private contact and set that up a little bit more. But for us, we're just going to go ahead and save and move into the contracts. So let's create a new contract for EXP 2022. A lot of times contracts are based on years, and we have start dates and things down here. To be able to save this form, we're going to need to pick a HR responsible. And ultimately over here, we have a bunch of extra information, some of which was added by us, including things like being paid by attendances and timesheets and things. But for the time being, we'll just give this person a very generous monthly salary. And to make our rules a little more interesting, as you'll see in a little bit, we'll go ahead and say that we're going to match 4%, or not match, we're going to contribute 4% of our gross wages towards a 401k. Contracts need to be running for them to be accessed from payroll, so keep that in mind. Very common error point, right? So with all of that said, oh, no, not quite. So we have one more thing we're going to need to do. Again, we are focusing on the US market, but virtually all of the techniques and modules we're talking about can work in any market. When I choose the USA employee, we get additional configuration. This is a US-specific payroll form for this employee. You can think of this a lot like the employee's W-4. You'll note that we have a bunch of W-4 specific information over here. All of that can just generally stay the same way it is right now, but if we say it shows Alabama as a state, we'll get specific Alabama remittance and form pieces over here. Let's go ahead and change this to Montana or something just to see another state. So, for example, Montana has exemptions depending on a variety of things, like you could be a tribesman or something, but that's not going to be necessary for today. So with those simple things done, creating an employee, creating a contract, and creating payroll forms, we're essentially ready to at least run our first payslip. So we'll jump over into payroll and create one. It's best practices to choose a lot of this configuration, or rather specifically the period before you launch into choosing your employee, because when you choose the employee, a lot of stuff is filled out for you automatically down here. So because we started our contract at midway through the month, Odoo has calculated that not our full salary is eligible for pay, And we have a unpaid type that selects that off, and thus they only get a partial of their salary. The working days here that we were just looking at are kind of inputs, and there's other inputs down here that we'll see in a little bit for additional things like bonuses or commissions. Let's hit compute sheet. If we go to salary, it will be blank, but we'll compute sheet. And now we have something that looks a lot more like a payslip for most people, right? So we have lines that are computed from rules. Those rules, you'll note that there are not rules for Alabama on here, or there aren't any lines for Alabama, for example, and that is because they don't live in Alabama, right? They don't have their form set up for that. But other things, like say 401k is set up, and you'll note that some of these are very basic rates, like FICA and or FICA, Medicare, and Social Security are essentially just percentage rates, and they apply to some kind of an amount here. Some of them, like the federal income tax, is actually tabled and margined and all this stuff, and so it's not as straightforward. So we compute the desired tax and then work backwards to a rate because we want the amount on the line to indicate the base of the tax, how much actual wage it's based on, right? So you'll note that these two have a different wage base, and that's ultimately because of the employee's 401k pre-tax deduction, right? All right, so speaking of rules, let's go ahead and go and look at some of the other parts of payroll, right? And what we're going to do is create a rule for this particular employee to act as a garnishment. So the easiest way to do that is to find the employee's ID, which I probably should have done, and I can do it right now. The employee's ID is 8, and I'm going to use that in my new rule. So let's try to make a rule. Create a rule. We're going to call it EXP garnishment. Typically, garnishments have their own accounts and everything, meaning that you open an account with a state or something to do the garnishment. This is going to be a normal deduction. We'll call it EE underscore EMP, I think it was 8, I hope. Might have been 7. You have to pick a salary structure. I gave it that code for a reason, and we'll see that in a second as well. And the sequencing is going to be something like 101 or somewhere, which I didn't really show, but the rules have their own sequences, and they run in the order of the sequence, as you might imagine. So this rule, if we left it like this, every employee would get this garnishment, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. So we're going to use a Python expression, and the kind of open part, or the sample code up here, tells you some of the inputs that you want to do, and the most important piece is that we want to assign a variable named result with the value of whether or not it should apply. So we're going to say employee .id equals 7, I believe is what it was. It might have been 8. It was 8. Perfect. Thank you. Somebody's paying attention. Get him a T-shirt. So we're going to say it's a fixed amount in this case, and we're going to say that it's -50, for example. This is the account, or where you would be paying it. So let's say this Montana. We'll create a Montana garnishments and save. So when we come over to the accounting tab, these are the accounts that you would use to be able to, when we actually make a journal entry for payroll. And we have some actions up here, which we're going to use on this particular rule to try to pre-fill in our accounts and stuff like that for us. So that is the reason I named this with EE in the beginning, is because we get the correct accounting format. It is negative, which unfortunately means that we probably you might consider these backwards. That's something you'll have to get used to when you're running payroll in Odoo, which is that a rule that's intended to calculate negative should probably have the opposite accounting side effect, is what you might imagine. All right, with that set up, we should be able to go back to our original payslip and recompute sheet. I will go over here first, though. So we have no garnishment yet, and we will compute sheet, and now we have our garnishment in here somewhere. I saw it change. Oh, there it is. Deduction right there for -50. Thus, we've removed $50 from the net salary, but all of the bases for the taxes and stuff remain the same. If that deduction was supposed to change the base for some of these taxes, you would use a different category than deductions. So there's deductions that affect essentially FICA or FUTA or FIT, or any combination of the two. We provide categories for that overlapping piece. All right, so this is just one payslip and not that much of an integrated employee experience with timesheets and attendances and the like. So let me cancel this and go ahead and delete it and make a batch. So as you might have guessed, batches allow you to basically use the same inputs or the same dates for a variety of employees. And we use this little wizard to pop up and select the employees. The top one here allows you to override the salary structure, to use this different salary structure. We don't do that in the US, but other markets like Peru have different salary structures that need to be run at different times for different reasons. And then this one is a filter, so if we were to say choose sales, we would filter down our list of our employees that we'd actually be doing running payroll for. But I want it for everybody, so we'll hit generate. And we have a smart button up here for six pay slips, and we'll page through them. So here's our EXP, OXP person. It has essentially the same data that you had before for all intents and purposes. No surprise there. Let's move on to another one and see if we've got any inputs or anything special in this person. Not so much. This is still just a salaried person with nothing else going on. All right, so this one is a paid on attendance person, right? So we have, in this case, we have a smart button to the attendances that are being linked to this payslip that were gathered for them. So here's a couple of sample payslips, a couple of sample attendance entries that were gathered. And thus we have number of days computed, number of hours, and a rate and an amount. It's a relatively low amount, which means that if we go to the salary computation, we're gonna see this blue line here, which is essentially just saying to us that this rule was applicable, but it computed to a $0 value. In this case, it's because the salary is so low that there's no withholding from it in this kind of a period, for monthly anyway. And as I showed, we can jump straight into the attendances, and we'll be able to see that on other things. So here is an employee who has a badge, which is you're potentially familiar with a gamification module from Odoo. We have extended that, and we have monetary reasons to give badges and things. We have two different types. One is fixed, which is one that would be applied on an ongoing basis. Every payslip you run will gather the fixed badges that are granted. And a paid in period, which is one that would be applied in a period, and thus it's only applicable in that period and not recurring, right? This person also has commissions, extremely low value of commissions, but that's just a demonstration of commissions in general. And we can jump straight to the commissions that we were being paid for right here. So more on commissions tomorrow. Jump back out to our payslips. Here's an employee with more commissions, and surely that's it. All right, so with all that out of the way, what's the next step? Usually paying the employees, right? So we can create, or rather, making the journal entry. So we'll jump back out to the batch. We have a smart button up here. If you have accounting configured, we can create a draft journal entry. We are going to need to correct something. So let's go find that private address for some of these employees. Accounting. So we have a employee net receivable or payable set up, and hopefully all the rest of them are set up the same, though I'm not sure that I trust that, so let's go ahead and jump into another tab. Navigate our way back over to our payroll and try to finish that batch off. Perfect, okay. So we have a variety of configuration on the salary journal that can simplify or make the journal entries, in our opinion, quite a bit better than the stock ones. But let's go ahead and see how we had that set up right now. We have, I believe, grouped journal entries. So in this case, we have one journal entry for the entire batch, and all of the data is essentially grouped. You'll note we emitted one line for AP for all of the FICA stuff, and it's grouped by partner, so that makes it very easy to remit and reconcile your payments to EFTPS. If you're familiar with EFTPS, or if you aren't rather, you do the very first step after logging in is to choose the form that you're remitting, which is ultimately why we named our partners this way, because we have 941 and a 940 form that would need to be essentially remitted separately. But this is the gross amount across all of the lines for those things. So let's go ahead and post that as well. We've decided that it's good. We'll jump back out to our payslip, and we have an additional button here, which is register payment. This is, again, configuration that allows on the salary journal that allows you to batch pay all of your employees' payables. And then we have an error. All right, well. So normally that button would take you to a batch payment with individual payments on per employee that is reconciled to the payroll journal entry, and thus you would be ready to either take that and send it to your bank or make a direct deposit EDI or something like that communication. So as you can see, running payroll is straightforward. There's the most complicated parts are probably individual withholdings or deductions, and everything else can be set up and relatively automated and easily remitted. And that is essentially the entire talk. I am very happy to take any questions you might have. It's right on time.
Are there any automated processes for actually filing the paperwork?
So we have some modules to be able to help with that. Specifically, we expose payslip lines and add some date filtering and things like that to gather them. But we have quick start packs to be able to install and set up payroll, and we also have managed payroll that we would assist with remitting and doing all of the filings and stuff as well.
Do someone have another question?
Does this payroll system have incentive programs, like for employees who could recruit resources? And second is, does it also connect to, let's say, projects? Like if they could get incentives for those who could bring leads?
Can you describe so incentive programs I understand, but what does that have to do with projects? Like timesheets, commissions? Because we do that.
Let's say, for example, you were the one who gave the leads to the company, and the leads were converted to a closed project.
Okay, sure. So we definitely we have a lot of commissions-based stuff, right? So we also author software on commissions, and we have hooks into that. So I would probably suggest using commissions for doing that. If you were doing individual payments for a lead that was delivered or something like that, typically in the US, that would not qualify as employee, right? So I'm sure that we could make that work through, custom rules or custom kind of ideas around what an employee is or something like that. That is very common, meaning that it's common to need to expand what payroll is, or the definition of payroll in a locale to accommodate incentive programs.